about famous kings and queens of England, more often than not, the first name that comes to your head is Henry VIII, Elizabeth or Victoria. And yes, they were interesting and great rulers. However, there are other royalties whose greatness is less known and are often overshadowed by the above-mentioned faces. Today we will look at 5 impressive things you probably don't know about Queen Caroline of Ansbach, who was, by the way, the great-great-grandmother of Queen Victoria. After refusing to marry Archduke Charles of Austria as the Lutheran Caroline would not convert to Catholicism, she met Prince George Augustus of Hanover, nephew of Queen Sophia Charlotte. The gentleman travelled incognito to Ansbach upon the encouragement of his father, the Electorate of Hanover, who did not want him to enter into a loveless and childless marriage like he did, and after hearing of Caroline's incomparable beauty and mental attributes, the two eventually fell in love. Princess Caroline married Prince George Augustus on August 22, 1705, at the Palace Chapel in Herrenhausen, Hanover, Germany. The union produced 8 children. Though Princess Caroline's marriage with Prince George Augustus was considered successful, the latter kept numerous mistresses. These infidelities were never a secret to Caroline, thus in her desire to keep a closer eye on them, Caroline made her husband's lovers as ladies-in-waiting. When Caroline arrived in England as Princess of Wales in 1714, she shocked the court with her regular bathing habits. She liked her skin and gowns to be clean and her servants well manicured, a feat which must have been quite difficult for those involved in the dirty work of running a household. Furthermore, she was bathing her children and putting them to bed herself. Based on this, we could suggest that Caroline considered it good practice to bath her children regularly, something which have earned her censure as a careless mother. She was always a progressive thinker, challenging opinions of science and religion amongst other subjects. Caroline was a great supporter of science and medicine, and was one of the first Westerners to have her children inoculated against smallpox. How it happened. The idea of inoculation, of infecting a child with a mild form of a disease in order to improve future immunity, was a relatively new one in London. The Royal Society had heard for first time about the subject in 1714, when was described how the practice was used in the Ottoman Empire. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, a smallpox survivor who had spent 2 years living in Constantinople as the wife of Britain's ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, had inoculated her own children and was an enthusiastic proponent of the idea. The nascent scientific community in London, the Royal Society, which was barely 50 years old at this point, was predictably interested of this finding. However, when it comes to a princess to involve the king's own grandchildren in pioneering medical research, well, this was something new. Caroline convinced the king to commune the sentence of 6 prisoners, so that they could be a part of an experiment. She made an attempt to inoculate the prisoners in question against smallpox, and when they all survived, she tried it again, but this time on children. Good results were shown, and therefore Caroline soon had her own children inoculated against the disease. With that being said, Caroline, in her own way, was a pioneer in the field of medicine. She also spent her time curating portraits and miniatures, and collecting jewelry. She had a vast library at St. James's Palace, and filled her court with artists, writers and other intellectuals, among whom was Isaac Newton. Caroline, who was both intelligent and curious, vastly outshone her husband in most cultural and political aspects. So much so, that when they were crowned king and queen, a satirist wrote about the royal couple, "You may strut, Dapper George, but 'twill all be in vain. We notice Queen Caroline, not you, that train." Furthermore, since George II was still Elector of Hanover when he became King of Great Britain, the Regency Act of 1728 was passed by Parliament so that Caroline could rule in her husband's place while he went on his extended trips to Germany. Caroline was popular with the people, and her husband knew that he benefited by association. At the Prussian court, Caroline's limited education was widened, and she adopted the liberal outlook possessed by Sophia Charlotte, who became her good friend and whose views influenced Caroline all her life. With that being said, when she became a queen, her liberal views did not change, and Caroline supported clemency for the Jacobites, supporters of the rival Stuart claim to the throne, freedom of the press and freedom of speech in Parliament.